Welcome to NP's Changing Practice. I'm Dr. Carol Berger, and I'm again with Mark Johnson, a PA who works in the hospital with me. We've worked together for many years. Mark's been on our podcast before, and today we're going to talk about a subject that's very important. It's burnout. What is it? And, why do we need to pay attention to it? Mark, I know this subject is very near and dear to your heart. So tell us a little bit about how you got interested in this syndrome called burnout.
Well, thanks again for having me. And I guess I'm interested in burnout because I've suffered from it myself. And it's not something that's immediately gone away and all of a sudden life is great. It's something that can be ongoing, only it can sometimes be worse at different times. And at all times in our careers, I think COVID's really put a lot of people over the edge. And I think it's important for me to continue to raise awareness of it and to talk about it because unfortunately, a lot of our healthcare partners are just too afraid to talk about it because they don't want to reveal that they have weakness. And I want to scream from the top of the mountain that it's okay to say that you're not perfect. But it's difficult for a lot of people. So I started my my blog a couple of years ago, initially to help PAs get into practice and also prepare for their first job. But I found that my passion was really into talking about burnout and people struggling. And I was able to collaborate with several people. Meg Letty is a PA that I have spoken to several times over the past couple of years. She's got a podcast that I definitely recommend. And she talks from her heart about, hey, I don't have really time to do this. I'm a busy working mom, but I'm burnt out, and let's start a conversation. And it's great to see that she's been able to continue on over the past couple of years. I think she's on season 3. But that kind of has motivated me to talk about this and raise awareness of it. I'll tell a quick story about myself. So how did I figure out I was burnout? I recall getting off during probably a couple of years ago. I got off work, I came home, and I like working in the yard, so I was trimming the tree in the front yard. It's not a super large tree. I needed a ladder to do that. While I'm cutting part of it, I probably was getting a little aggressive with it. My neighbor next door said, hey, Mark, you're going to leave some limbs on that tree. And I'm thinking, I just want people to be able to see the house. It seems a little bit too much. And then the second neighbor said, hey, Mark, what are you doing to your tree? And I just kept doing my thing. I was getting a little bit annoyed, but whatever. I was getting frustrated because here I am after a long day's work, and here I'm working to cut up this tree, and nobody's out here helping me. And where's my daughter and my son? Why aren't they helping me? Why aren't they just volunteering just to carry these away? And around that time, my wife walks out and she said, what did you do to that tree? And I went on a bit of a diatribe of, I work 12 hours a day. I come home, I got to trim the tree, and I'm just so tired, and nobody's out here helping me. And I really lost it. And I'm not an angry person. And then as I'm walking to the garage, I subsequently trip over my son's scooter, which I subsequently grabbed and threw into the bushes. And my neighbor, who at this time was coming over to, try to help me a little bit, slowly walked back to his house because he was scared of like what I was going to do next. And I stomped inside, and now I'm like, okay, now everyone's mad at me because my wife just turned and walked inside. She did not even know how to respond. She wasn't expecting any of that. And she really wasn't trying to make me mad. She was just commenting on this poor looking tree, which, by the way, I was a little bit aggressive with. But the question my wife asked me later was, why are you so angry? And I had to ask myself, why are you angry, Mark? And that was really kind of difficult for me because I'm not an angry person. And over time, kind of learning about anger, is I found that anger in itself is usually not what's going on. It's usually there's a lot of other things going on underneath all of that. And I think burnout really came out as anger for me. It may come out differently for other people. Maybe some people don't eat. I tend to eat like crazy if I'm stressed. Um, but for me, it came out as anger, and I had to deal with it. And thankfully, I began taking steps to work through that. And we'll talk later about some of the steps that I recommend to people.
So
Go ahead.
when did you realize this was burnout? I mean, because like we think of burnout as like, okay, I've been in a job for 20 years. I'm tired of doing the same old thing. I'm just burned out on it. But that's not the kind of burnout we're talking about here.
Well, a lot of it is that I just noticed that I was exhausted all the time. And the WHO finally added burnout to its ICD-9 in 2019, and they describe it as chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. And they noted that it has 3 dimensions, and I identified with all 3 of these. The first one is feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion.
Mm-hmm.
Well, most of us who are working in healthcare today definitely feel that. 2 was increased mental distance from one's job, or feelings of negativism or cynicism related to one job, like the feeling of, why can't this patient get their diabetes under control? It's not really that hard.
Or why do they keep coming back?
Yeah, why do they keep coming back? Why can't they just not eat that pickle? And now their CHF is acting up again. And that cynicism that we all have felt at times, but this becomes more of a daily thing that you're feeling. And the third thing is reduced professional efficacy. So you tend to see your work negatively, without value, or basically meaningless. Like, what's the use? Because they're going to keep coming back anyhow. So I'm just going to come in here and I'm just going to put in my 12 and be done. And all of these things we hear from our colleagues frequently, and yet none of them identify that they're burnout. And maybe they're not burnout, but they're showing signs of that.
Showing the signs of it, yeah.
But they're really not talking about it. And what I really want to work towards is all of us having the ability just to talk about where we are right now.
Or recognize it. Our workplaces to recognize it. What are some of the things that our workplaces can do to help us when we begin to feel this, or how can they prevent us from getting to this point?
Well, the interesting thing, Carol, is that I always thought, like, when you're burnout, this is something I have to work through. This is something about me. And it honestly puts the blame on us as providers. But when the WHO wrote this definition, they describe this as workplace stress, and they also talked about it's occupational. And so this isn't all on just that person, but something that the occupation and your job is really placing onto you. And so, yes, there are some things that we can do, and there's some things that we'll talk about, but I really think it's important to say that you can't yoga yourself out of burnout. And that's something that's
an important point. I just meditate, get the meditation app, go do some
mindfulness
yoga.
is a term that I hated for years. Even though I practiced some mindfulness, I hated the term, because it's like, why don't you work on some mindfulness? Maybe you need a little bit of break. And you're just like, yeah, I'd love to be able to do that, but you're not even like, and I hate to say it, but sometimes the administrators are just clueless as far as, how about you follow me around for a day and see everything that I'm doing? So I have a list of some things that I feel like need to change in healthcare in general. One thing that I see a lot is employers are valuing their providers based solely on their RVUs, or patients per hour. As a manager, I very much kept track of patients per hour. That was something I did. And yet it doesn't show exactly your value. But when your value is more on those numbers, it really can be discouraging if you're not the fastest. And maybe you're the slowest, and yet you provide great care. You take time with patients.
Your patient satisfaction scores are really high then.
And your patient satisfaction scores, you would think, would be high, but if those guys don't, if the patients don't fill out some of those surveys, maybe it doesn't show in that. And
Well, and
so
I mean, sometimes only the people that are dissatisfied fill out the surveys,
that's
not
exactly the
necessarily the
case.
ones that are had a great experience. They're like, oh, that's good, you know. It's usually the people that didn't that will fill them out.
And so, yeah, and so then a lot of times your income is based on these surveys that really are not a correct picture, because most of the patients who think you're great won't fill out a survey because they figure you already know you're great. In fact, I recall several times telling patients, I'm like, they're like, what could I do today? I'm like, well, you know what? Why don't you fill out one of those surveys? Because you would think we get positive ones every day, but we don't. And several of those people either wrote a nice letter or card or something and went kind of over the top. But those things really make a big deal, make a big difference in your day and your career. Just a nice handwritten card. I got one here a couple of weeks ago, and it just made my day. I brought it
But
home
yeah,
to my wife.
you bring up a good point, because for me, I often always worked in the hospital. I've worked in rural America, which I have to say is the best place in the world to work. And I got to know my patients like my family. And it would meant more to me that my patients said something nice about me and that they valued me than the administration.
Yes, it does, because that's really, it goes back
That's
to,
why I was there. I was there for the patients. I wasn't there for the administration.
yeah, because, when they're looking at numbers and it doesn't say the numbers that they want, that's when they place all of your value on that. It's very disheartening,
Mhm.
because you feel like I pour my life into this job.
Well, and fast isn't always good. I remember, in fact, he was a PA. He did a thing at a conference, and he talked about how he had the power to change his appointment times to 30-minute slots instead of 15. And then he tracked how much money he saved the company by having the time to look up to see if CTs had already been done. And so he didn't end up reordering a lot of stuff. And he was able to coach his patients so well that his patient satisfaction scores went up. I mean, the whole thing was positive because he tracked it all. And he was able
Yeah.
to show the financial benefit and the patient outcomes, because he was able to really put not just numbers in a system, but take care of people.
Yeah. And when you can show that, it's great. It's that's a lot of work. I personally haven't been able to, and I honestly wouldn't even know what all the
In
numbers to
our
look at. But
environment, I don't think it would be even possible. I think he had a private practice and he was able to, manage that. But I don't think in our avenue it would be.
yeah, so another thing I had listed, so electronic health record, unfortunately, is not going away. There was a time probably when we were hoping it would, but it's not going away. But as you know, we're spending way too much time in front of the computer, and so this is something that has got to get better. Patients feel less connected because we're in front of a computer. We feel overwhelmed with, if you're rounding for uh, 4 hours in the morning, they say it's going to be double the time to do your documentation. So like 8 hours. And the amount of time when I worked in hospital medicine, especially, these long diatribe of notes, and I never really got feedback was, do I really need all that? Or what do I need? What do I not need? And that goes back to continuous education of, okay, so what points are important here? What do we not need to include in this? But
And do we
at the
need the
time,
entire patient's history from day one of their life? Or are we just talking about the problem that they're in the hospital for?
yeah, and that goes back to a continuous education that we all need, but not in these like long, like, hey, we're gonna do like a 3 hour webinar, and because we're busy people. And so a lot of times it needs to be tailored to each provider. Like, hey, here I reviewed your charts, they look great. Here's some things we need or not need. And that sometimes is with CDI professionals, which I've worked with some, learning of how to document correctly a good note, but it doesn't have to be filled with fluff, for number one, which we see a lot with scribes or people who have a lot of smart phrases. You can actually make some really good smart phrases that will allow you to do your work quickly. And that's one thing I'm personally working on right now, is trying to figure out, what am I typing a lot and how can I make a smart phrase so I don't have to type it over and over during the day, but also make it so that it's not fluff. So it's not just
Well, and that
filling a
it's
chart.
personal to the patient. It's not just a standard statement that you put in everybody's chart. How does it apply to this patient?
Yeah, and it's kind of tough to do, but it is possible, but it takes some time up front. And early in your career, it's worth putting the time into something like Epic so that you have years of now I have a template already made. So the other thing that in general that our workplaces need is they need to give us the tools to do our job. So if they want us to do X, Y, or Z, what tools do we have? Do we have social workers? The answer is no.
Not
Do we
really.
have techs? Often we don't. Do we have someone to set up for when it's time to suture or do an IND? Usually no. So when we're starting to see, oh, our numbers aren't as good as they used to be, what's the scenario that we're looking at? And we have to, it's not the same as it was years ago when, for me, I could walk in a room and the suture tray would be set out, all my stuff would be set up. I'd go in there, I can get it done. Now I walk in a room, there's nothing set up. And unfortunately, I don't have staff oftentimes to help us set up, not because they're not willing to, it's because we don't have either the staff or it's too busy or we're boarding patients or whatever the situation is. And so when we're being asked to do certain things, we need to kind of give a feedback of, do we have the tools to do our job? And I think that's important. And it's a good question to ask. It's a fair question to ask.
Mhm.
So, so a lot of that's negative stuff, I feel like, and I'm a very positive person. So how exactly are we going to work through that? I think the answer is that I'm not going to give you things today that's going to fix burnout. I do think that you can build resiliency, and even saying resiliency gives me a little bit of cringe-worthy moment because, now you see hospitals having resiliency webinars and okay, so we're not going to fix the problem, but we're going to make you more resilient. And that makes me kind of angry, honestly, because we're not getting to the root of the problem here. But until that gets fixed, there are some things that can make you more resilient. And resiliency is basically, it's our ability to adapt well and recover quickly after stress, adversity, trauma, and tragedy. So resilient people tend to
Now,
maintain their
how
footing.
fast can we bounce back?
Yeah, they have a healthier level of physical and psychological response when faced with challenges. If they're not resilient, they dwell on problems, stay overwhelmed, use unhealthy coping tactics, and develop anxiety and depression. So the idea here is to not get to that point. So I have 7 tips that I thought that everyone listening could actually start applying to life today that I think could be very helpful. The first thing I had was self-awareness. And this is basically, how are you feeling today? Like if you had one word of how your day is going today, what would that be? And frankly, that's sometimes difficult for me. I might just put good, but how is it great? I don't know about great. Is it terrible? Well, it's not really terrible, but really getting more in touch with how are you feeling and why are you feeling that way? For me, I've tried to start some journaling of writing down like feelings I'm going through, even if I don't even know exactly what it is. I may look back later and say, wow, I was really feeling this way, but at the time I didn't identify that.
Mm-hmm.
A simple thing that any listener can get is an app I use called Insight Timer, which is an app that every day when you open it up, it says, how are you feeling today? And it gives you options. And if you say, let's say good, it says, why are you feeling good today? And you can type in your health or friends or family or food or whatever that would be. And according to my app, I think I've logged maybe 137 times or something like that, which is kind of a big accomplishment for me. The ADHD in me tends to start something and not finish it.
So just becoming a little more aware of what your feelings are and why you're feeling them, what's going on at that time.
Yeah, and then based on what answer you put in there, it actually may give you some sort of mindfulness practice of, it could be a shorter or long one of maybe if you're dealing with a difficult day. And this is something new for a lot of people, and a lot of people have never done it before, but really it's about taking a few moments of time, even if it's 5 minutes, to have some quiet time, just quiet time, or if you want to pray, or if you just want to sit there and think, or whatever it would be, maybe take some deep breaths. Whatever that would be. At first, it feels really awkward. It takes some time, but I do think that it's well worth your time. And that app is a free one. You don't have to buy a bunch of stuff. You can, but a lot of free stuff on there that you can start trying some of this. I think it can be helpful for everyone. But something as simple as, if you don't like yoga, just for me, I go when I'm at the gym, I just stretch. I might have some
Mhm.
music on and I'm just stretching. And that to me is very relaxing. Or else after the gym, maybe I'll hit the massage chair at Planet Fitness or the massage
That,
table.
that's the
Um,
whole thing worth the $10 a month, is that
yeah, well, yeah, I think, well, for the deluxe membership, it's like 25 a month. But
25,
for
yeah,
me,
but I mean, you get the massage Lux bed and the hydrotherapy, or yeah.
that's to me an investment into my well-being, and so that's really important. So, and then something very silly, I consider mindfulness, is coloring in these adult coloring books, which I never thought in a million years I'd do that.
It is a way to de-stress.
It is it, and it forces you to like slow things down a little bit. Around Christmas time, building Legos with my son, it was not just building, but it was also being there with my son. And actually, we might not talk a lot, or else it may offer time for conversation. That was actually really important for me, and I felt good when I was doing it. Something sitting by the campfire is always an important one for me, or something like tying fishing flies. So these are all things that help, I think, with self awareness.
And we all have to find what it is. Where is our happy place? Where for me does time stop? And I'm not aware of how long could do it forever. Like for me, karaoke. I love karaoke. I could go in the basement and I'm Celine Diane for a little while, or whatever, whoever I'm pretending to be for that moment. But time stops. That's my happy place. Or writing or things like that. We all have to find where that place is for us, that we can just be in the moment.
Well, and I tried a float spa. I don't know if you ever tried that, but a float spa
Oh,
is
I did. I
a very
did.
interesting experience. At first, I'm like, I'm going to be in this thing for an hour. In fact, I watched some YouTube videos about it first. It was a gift from my wife. But after I did it, I was like, that was actually a really good
It's a
experience.
weightless experience. I mean, you
It's
really are weightless.
Yes. But the idea is just of nothing. It's
Mhm.
dark. A lot of times you can have light, but a lot of times it's dark. You're in a warm saltwater bed and you're
Cocoon,
just
kind
floating.
of like, yeah, just floating.
And that was an adjustment for me because I like lots of noise and I like excitement. And when things slow down, sometimes I honestly can sometimes feel sad. But I have to be okay with some of that quiet time because we all need some of that. The next thing I had was physical activity, which we've kind of talked about, but we know that endorphins get produced when you have physical activity. About 5 years ago, I started working out with the gym with some buddies, and lifting weights was actually a huge thing for me. You not only build muscles, you build confidence, but you're also releasing those endorphins. And guess what? If you go with a buddy, it's almost like counseling because you're talking like how your job's going,
Yeah,
how's their job
yeah.
going. And so I always think of that as really a part of a therapy. Um, the third thing I had was creating a sense of community. And when I say community, whether it's inside work or outside of work, with your colleagues that you work with, getting to know them other than just like, how's your shift going? Like, hey, how are your kids doing? Or I know you're into woodworking or you really like working out the yard. How's your flowers growing? Or what have you built lately? Or have you been
Yeah,
on a fishing
something
trip?
personal about that person other than just work.
It makes such a big difference when you get to know people personally because then they feel like, oh, they actually are listening, they do care about me, and they're more willing to invest more time to talk to you. And that also offers opportunity for them to maybe talk to you when maybe they're having a difficult time with work. And you're able to say, hey, I know you got a lot going on today, is there something I could help you with? That's a huge thing that when you offer that to a colleague, I think it's appreciated and it's almost always returned. Um, so, whether it's a hobby group, I was in a fly fishing group for a while. I've been in some groups like kind of like Boy Scouts with my son, church groups, like-minded individuals where you can just sit down and talk about life in
Mhm.
general. Whatever that would be for you, I think that's sense of community is super important. So that when you're going through a rough time, you have someone to lean on to talk to, like, hey, I don't know how to deal with this. And I almost guarantee you somebody in that group has dealt with these same things, and here's how they work through it. Um, and I just had this morning, I had a morning coffee breakfast with a good friend of mine, and we just talked about life in general. And
Yeah, I mean, those
he's
do a
not,
lot of good, just having that breakfast or lunch with a friend.
and I like the fact that he's not in medicine. So when I talk to him about some of the things that I deal with, he doesn't understand it, but he can give me a perspective. I think that's very healthy to say, huh, this is very interesting. I wouldn't have ever thought of it that way. So the fourth thing I down was a professional therapist. So a lot of people haven't been to counseling or therapy, but I strongly recommend it. I'm the first one to say I do have a therapist, and I'm not ashamed to say that. And I recommend it to my patients. It's somebody you can talk to, and really, how I look at it is you're just saying a lot of things out loud, and most of the time you come up with the solutions yourself. But it does help with some of that self-awareness, like we talked about
I think
before.
we need to get back away from that stigma that mental health somehow means, if you need to go get help and talk to somebody, you're less of a person. We need to realize we all need people to talk to. And therapists, I mean, my daughter's a counselor, and I love hearing her stories and listening to her but I mean, going to somebody outside of the family that doesn't know you, doesn't know your problems, but can just listen. And like you said, you solve most of your problems. They just help to guide your thinking. Did you think of this? Did you think of that? And help you to come up with your own solutions. I really think we all should go and talk to people.
Absolutely. And there is a stigma. There's a book, I can't remember the author, but it's called A Long Walk Out of the Woods. And it's about a physician who was an alcoholic. And he got to the point that he was suicidal and he was about to kill himself. And his wife called and it stopped him. But in order for him to become a physician and practice again, took a long time. And it's because of the stigma of, oh, he's an alcoholic. Oh, he's got a lot of problems. And I'm not saying that people who are abusing drugs or alcohol should be working while they're intoxicated. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that PAs, NPs, physicians, nurses, we have problems. We have addictions, and we have to talk about it, because if we don't talk about it, it will only get worse. And we have to be willing to say, yeah, I'm struggling in this area. But unfortunately, once it gets out, it's like, oh, are they really able to do their job? And the thing about it is, if somebody has a medical problem, we don't question it.
Yeah, I can
They're
see
out for a
that.
little while. Oh, we'll let them
Yeah, if
be
it's
out, and then they come back.
hypertension, they had a heart attack, that's fine.
Yeah,
But, oh, if they had a drug problem, yeah, I hear what you're
yeah.
saying.
And yet we're in an environment where we're exposed to so much things that it's really easy to become addicted to all kinds of things.
Mhm.
And we need to work with people to allow them to obviously get recovery, but also be able to get back to doing what they do without this huge stigma. And I think it's getting better, but it's taking time. Lorna Bream was a physician in New York City. She was a medical director, and I had a picture of her from an article, and she killed herself. She actually committed suicide, and her family have made a foundation about physician suicide. And when I see a picture of her, it makes me very sad, because you see someone who looks so bright and full of energy, and nobody around her knew that she was depressed and sad, and nobody knew what she was going through. And I tend to think that it's because we don't allow us to talk about, hey, I'm really struggling right now. And she had actually gotten COVID, I believe, and then recovered, but then she was just overwhelmed with life. And so those are things that I think is really important, because the suicide rate amongst providers is way higher than the general population. And it's something that we need to talk about.
Well, and like you bring out here too, you said that, a lot of times our employers do offer the service to where we can get to talk to therapists. It's just our own um, thoughts of needing help or having to ask for help that stops us a lot of times. And I think we have to get beyond that and realize that that is just as important as taking my blood pressure medicine. If I'm struggling,
Absolutely. A lot of people don't know that an employee assistance program is offered through most employers. It's
mhm,
something you should look into. There's an 800 number you can call, and when you call, and I've done it myself, they'll say, "What are you dealing with?" and they can help get you with a counselor. They even have like talk space where you can get on online and have a therapist if you can't meet with someone. And yes, it's really makes you kind of nervous, meeting with somebody and sitting down. But once you actually do it, I think you'll find that it's an important investment of your time. Um, and just working through some of things. And if your employee pays for it, this is not any money out of your pocket.
no.
And
And you
and
can
by the way,
text, I think you can video call. There's so many different ways now that you can do this that, is beneficial.
and it also will often cover your spouse and children. And so if most of you have that, you need to look into it because I'm all about free. Um,
Mhm.
okay, so that was four. The fifth thing was finding meaning in your work. So one thing that I've worked through with my therapist was um, I felt like through my whole career, I maybe got pats on my back occasionally, but frankly, we don't get that a lot, do we, Carol?
No. We
Patients might say
actually hear
thank
more
you.
of the negative. It might be that
Yes.
you did something that just saved somebody's life, but what they're going to tell you is that you've got two things in your inbox that are queries that need to be taken care of right away.
No, it's
And
it's
it
so
just is
true.
like that, that we
It's
don't get the accolades for the good things we did. We just get called on the things that we're deficit on.
well, and here you are. You have with your years of experience. There's probably people outside of your practice that think, "Wow, you're an amazing person." But how many times have the people that you have worked with over time in your years of practice have they said, "Wow, you are just amazing at what you do"? I would say that likely that's a limited number because
Mhm.
a lot of times people, I don't know why, but they're afraid to really either tell you how they feel or else they're just too overwhelmed themselves. But we often will not hear it, even if we feel inside like we're doing a great job. And so, one thing that my therapist recommended, which I thought was great advice, was at the end of every shift, ask yourself, how did I change a life today?
That's a really good point. I like that, Mark, because that's the bottom line. How did you affect somebody? And it's your patience where you're probably going to get that feeling of I did something really good. I listened to somebody, or I held somebody's hand, or I talked to a family member. I took that extra time. And maybe that's where we're going to have to look. I think our employers are going to eventually have to catch on to that, because happy employees are going to make happy patients, right?
Absolutely. And finding meaning in what you do.
But we
And so,
all need to feel valued.
yes, because in what we do, everyone thinks, oh, you fix someone and they go home. Well, it's not that simple most days. Like a kidney stone patient comes in, I give them good pain medicine. We tell them where it's at and they go home. But how many patients do we have like that? Not that many. It may be that I talked to a diabetic patient who's got really bad foot ulcers, and I really talked to him about why he's got to get control of his diabetes because I'm really worried about him. But I don't talk to him in a judgmental, strict, waving my finger at him. I say, I know it's been hard for you. Like, what's the most difficult part about managing that? And when we actually listen, you can finally hear, well, that medicine made me sick. Well, have you talked to your doctor about maybe changing
Or I
that?
can't
No, I was
afford
too
it.
afraid. Yeah, or whatever that would be. And so that's just one of the many patients we see every day. And yet we're like, yeah, that's just our job. It is just our job, but you didn't have to listen to
Take the
that
time to
patient.
listen.
You
And
could have
sometimes
said,
we
well,
don't
somebody else will deal
understand.
with it. What's
I
that?
can remember a diabetic patient I had one time, and yeah, I was talking to him about his diet, and I found out that by asking that question, what is the most difficult part, is that all he could afford was to make one pot of spaghetti at the beginning of the week, and he ate on that all week long because that's all the money he had.
Wow.
And I think sometimes we just get in our heads that everybody's on the same playing field as we are, just go to the store and get the right foods. Maybe they have transportation issues. Maybe they don't, the meds made them sick. Maybe something didn't work right, that they can't do that. I think just taking time to listen.
Well, and I think what's changed my practice a lot would first off, sometimes just walking in the door said, "Hey, I'm sorry you're going through this today. I'm gonna do everything I can to make you feel better." That is huge to the patients and their family. But then also, especially with people who are dealing with addiction, saying, "I don't look at you as an alcoholic. I look at you as a person who happens to have a problem with alcohol."
Mhm.
And is it the same thing or is it different? I would say it's a lot different because I'm not labeling him as the alcoholic. I'm labeling him as a guy. Here's a nice guy. He happens to have a problem and he needs help. How could I talk to him? Because I could walk in there and say, "You're an alcoholic. You're going to die. This is terrible." Or I could say, "I'm really worried about you. And I know this is very difficult. What is maybe some things that we could do to help you through this?" And you can see oftentimes people's hearts opening up to you and they're willing to talk. And now all of a sudden they're telling you the extent of their illness. And now they might actually be willing to seek help for it because you came in with more of an open heart saying, "How can I help you?" rather than "You need to do X, Y, and Z," because they've been told that
Absolutely.
so many times.
And it doesn't work. It doesn't work to go
It
in and
doesn't
say
work.
X,
And
Y,
you
and
know,
Z. It
Carol,
doesn't
what
work
they've
and never has worked with anybody.
the interesting thing, I learned something. I think the guy, it's about compassionomics. I think he wrote a book. But what we learned in school was don't get too involved with families. You got to have space. And what he said was that's a bunch of baloney. We actually, when we have compassion for patients, I mean, even as I'm talking about caring for those patients, I'm having positive feelings of I did something right for that patient. I showed him that I truly cared about him and I wasn't judgmental. And that's something that we can all offer every day. But why don't
Every
we?
single patient.
It's because we when we're burnt out, we don't have the room to have those emotions. And yet that's exactly what we need to share in order for us to also get better.
You are so
So
right. Well,
um
that's another whole episode, but
it really is.
it really
Yeah.
is.
So my last couple of things was number 6, work-life balance. And basically what that means is finding your balance and be willing to not sacrifice your family for work. And I found that especially important when things came up. And there's sometimes you help your team, there's other times when it's okay to say no. And the last thing was stay curious and dream big. And what I mean by that is, especially now at the beginning of the year, look back at 2022. What did you accomplish? What did you, are you glad that happened? Or what are some things in 2023 that you could dream? What do you really want to do? And why are you waiting? So maybe you want to take a trip. What are you waiting for? You're not ever going to be in that place where you think, "I'm finally there." You need to do it. And maybe you want to take a trip to Hawaii, but you don't have the finances. Okay, take a trip to Arkansas or
Yeah,
Florida or
I mean,
somewhere. Do
smaller
something.
steps. Yeah.
Um,
But I love your
so
dream big. We need our dreams.
absolutely. And go to that concert that you've been wanting to go to. What are you holding back on? And I know financially and all of those things, but now is the time just to say, yeah, I have all kinds of limitations, but try to focus on what am I able to do? Because I see too many patients in the ER, unfortunately, who maybe arrive dead or find out a cancer diagnosis. They've waited their whole life and they put all their money in their retirement and now they're not able to do it because their spouse is sick or dying or whatever the case. And I do agree that you need to save for tomorrow, but there is a point where we really need to
You
try
have
to
to
live in
live
the
for
moment.
today. Yeah,
We really
live for
do.
today. Mark, you're an amazing PA and a wonderful member of our team. I am so pleased to be able to work with you. And every time I see you at work, you make my day a little brighter. So I want to thank you for being with us today. Again, be sure to check out our website, npschangingpractice.com. We have games, we have case studies, and a whole lot of things to help you study and succeed in your classes. Also, again, check out Mark's blog. It is PAs for Life Coaching.com. Is that .com, Mark?
Yeah, paforlifecoaching.com.
Yeah, and it's not 4, it's the number 4. So
Yes.
PA4, like the number 4, lifecoaching.com, and
Yeah.
read about his amazing stories.
Yeah, and I'm always looking for people who want to share maybe their burnout experience or just their experience in healthcare. So if there's anyone interested in writing, I would love to share that experience on the blog. I love collaborating with other healthcare providers.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And we will see you on our next episode. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Carol.